Hello and welcome to RaceSpot. The RaceSpot YouTube. Probably been a while since a lot of people have been here. As you noticed, I hit the wrong music because I'm not used to directing. That's usually Hugo Luiz's job, but
Man, I'm great. Really excited to be on the show and ready to talk about the BS and a little bit of strategy.
The defense is that we have an old television here that takes about 15 minutes to actually get colour into it. So aside from that, I'm here and I'm fine, and we can talk Blancpain.
I'm doing excellent. I'm excited to get to talk about the upcoming season because, man, the qualifiers they put on some stunning races.
that they definitely did. And let's actually run down, as I apparently muted myself. Hugo says I muted myself, but OBS is telling me that I picked it up. So hold on just a second. We apparently cannot hear me. That's actually really interesting because OBS says otherwise. Now Hugo's saying I'm back. Hugo Luiz is confusing me, but now let's run down and let's go towards the actual preview show. And actually, before we go into preview, let's start it out with a bit of review and look at the results from the 2016 championship, just as a bit of a refresher. And that's, yes, Mr. Creeks, Olaf Facebook, that's Hugo messaging me. This is the results, though, from your 2016 championship, VRS Coanda SimSport, rounding it out just by a single point over Heidenfeld Core Motorsports, followed by INX Red, Redline Black, INX Yellow, Pure Racing Team number 71, Soul McLaren in that top 10, INX Blue, TTLR Next Level Racing, Redline Green, and Corim Racing. Jake, I know you did a chunk of that championship with me last season. Those guys put on a fantastic show up and down the field.
They certainly did, and well, it was pretty much testament to what an inaugural season would have been, and the championship came down to the wire. The championship came down to the difference of one final point when all was said and done. So you look at that championship, you look at the names that were there fighting towards the top. It was sensational to see, and the best of the best were trying to get there to really win that season. And in the end, it seemed that the team that was the most prepared and even the most lucky managed to come away with the title.
Yeah, luck definitely played a huge part of that championship. VRS Coanda SimSport, they found themselves in some pretty dire situations over the course of that season. You think about what happened at Spa, you think about what was happening at Silverstone, think about what happened at Brands Hatch. They managed to just dig themselves, they dug deep within themselves, Jake, and they managed to just basically pull success out of seemingly nowhere. There was one point where both me and Will, I remember at Brands Hatch, after they got hit by Dark Huntigo, we basically said their championship's hopes were crushed. Well, they showed us.
They certainly did, and at the end of that result, they got second place. It even comes down to the final race of the season as well. Had to make those positions in the final few minutes to get themselves into that championship winning position. Did a job that they needed to do, and the team that they brought on that day was the best team overall. The thing that they have to worry about, though, is an ever-evolving field with ever-evolving drivers. You have to argue there's still going to be 3 or 4 great names coming in from qualifying as well that can certainly play a hand in, and with every team now trying to evolve and really put themselves at the forefront of this, it could be very easy to go from 1st to 10th in the split of 1/10 of a second.
And that seems like a perfect segue point to me. We talk about a lot of these teams that finish here amongst your top 10 in the championship. VRS Coanda SimSport, Heidenfeld Core Motorsports, INX, Pure. A lot of those teams that finished and ran strong in that main championship, Joe and Sean. As we go to now your pro qualifiers, a lot of those names carry over from the results from your pro qualifiers. Interesting to note, INX is not on this list. This is because they they had to requalify. They retained their spot. Someone else got that 25th spot, but they're still in the championship. These are 25 new teams coming in. But you think about these teams that are coming in. I'll start with you, Joe. VRS Coanda Sinsport in the number 8. That's the Mikkel de Jong car. You have the Pure Racing Team Red, number 70. Iberica, another Pure car. Heidenfeld Core Motorsports. There's a lot of talent that ran in that winter championship.
There was. The competition up at the front of the field was extremely intense. I kept saying it during the broadcast, but you had to be flawless during the races to really finish even in the top 5. And among those, the one that sticks out the most is definitely VRS Coanda Simsport number 8. You mentioned Mitchell de Jong, David Williams, Philip Stam in that team, of course, Rocco Barone. When we watched them, mostly Mitchell de Jong and David Williams in those qualifier races, it was like no one could touch them. And they had some sort of extra pace that whenever they wanted, at the time that they felt their strategy was safe, they could just take off down the road. And they were infallible. So I think we need to keep our eyes on that number 8 machine and seeing what they could do throughout this season.
Yeah, we'll definitely talk about both that number 8 machine as well as the other couple of Coanda cars, because there's been some shuffling amongst a lot of your teams. We'll get to that in a second, though. But, Sean, you're Mr. Strategy Man, and when we get to the schedule, we're going to talk about this a lot. What did you see from these top teams that they were able to succeed in terms of strategy? What were they able to pull off in pit road that others weren't? What did they make work that other people maybe struggled with?
Well, I will say that, one of the keys to endurance racing is actually taking care of the car. Okay, and first and foremost, the best part of their strategy is consistently they did a good job of taking care of their machines, but having the right driver to start off these endurance races is very important when laying out that strategy. We saw starting heavy with fuel, maybe taking a couple tires. That pit stop, of course, being very, very important. The Mercedes and the Audis, with their fuel, full fuel, and how long they're able to run, we're able to kind of take advantage of that a little bit during the series, during the qualifiers.
Yeah, that was definitely some big things that happened during that championship. And actually, let's start segueing into this now, as we're basically getting to talking about strategy already. And here's your schedule, and this is where a lot of this going to come from. 6-round championship. Have the 3 hours of Monza that's happening this Saturday. 2 weeks after that, 90 minutes of Brands Hatch. 3 hours of Silverstone follows. Then 90 minutes of Zolder with 6 hours of Spa, and then finally the 3 hours of the Nürburgring. And Jake, I'm going to start with you first. Last season, it was a bit of an endurance championship. From here, with the 2 90-minute races, we're kind of bridging the gap between the 2 real-world Blancpain championships of the Sprint Series and the Endurance Championship. In this sort of format, you have to be very good at multiple types of GT racing to have any hope within this realm.
You certainly do here, and what you also look at this series being is very difficult in terms of your car choice as well. There's 5 types. Let's get some words out here, ladies and gentlemen. 5 types of car that you really have an opportunity of using, and each one will have a strength and have a weakness over the series. And I think that it's not going to be a clear-cut championship as we didn't see last season. I think that what you also see with the tracks that are on offer, there are quite a few slow tracks there. There are quite a few tracks where overtaking becomes an issue. There are a few tracks where there are different characteristics to do with them. But the essence and the ebb and flow, there are quite a few similarities from track to track. I think it will come down to who does know how to play that card the best, who knows how they play their strategy cards correct, because it does take a little bit of outside the box thinking to really bring you into a championship. Those who play by the book, they're by the wayside.
Definitely, and while we're talking about that, I mean, Sean, we're going to start talking about strategy here with you. These 3-hour races, for the most part, I think are relatively straightforward. You're basically going to pit at the top of every hour. You're going to put however much fuel you need in, and you're going to change tires at least once, possibly twice. It depends on what your car can do. In my opinion, the big windows of opportunity when it comes to strategy is going to come from the 6-hour race at Spa, and this might surprise a lot of people, but those 2 90-minute races as well at Brands Hatch and Zolder.
Well, I agree with you on the 90-minute races. Listen, there's a whole plethora of avenues you can travel down there for strategy on those 90-minute races, because the window is so wide for your pit strategy there because of the, again, going back to the what on the Merc and the GT3 cars. I think we're looking at just over an hour. I think it's an hour and 5 minutes. So there's a lot you can do there with that window, and you can start light, get your fast driver in the seat, get out to a good jump. I really think this, for strategy, when you talk about Zolder, that's I'm sorry, not bad strategy. We were talking about the flow, how these tracks are all similar. I think Zolder presents the big problem on this schedule for everybody. That's going to be the race to watch, and I think strategy is going to be a really, really big key there. And in both the 90-minute races, I think even maybe when we get to the Nürburgring at the end of the schedule there, I think you may see a little bit of strategy played out there well, because funny things can happen at the ring.
Definitely funny things can happen at the ring. And while we're talking about this, for those who are maybe unaware why we're so hyped up about these 90-minute races and why that's so exciting strategy-wise, is for those who don't know, yes, everyone's going to come down and pit, and the normal realm of thinking is, well, it's a short race, you're just going to come in and do the shortest stop you possibly can, just fuel and go. Here's the thing that's interesting with these 90-minute races, Sean. You have a 25-second driver swap. You have to swap drivers at some point during the race. If you just fill the car up and take gas only, you have essentially probably about a 15 to 20 or so second window, if you just take fuel, that nothing is happening during the pit stop. That you could either be doing, one, you could have started lighter on fuel, or two, you could potentially be swapping out tires. And that is where the strategy really comes into play. Who builds your setup? Do you build a setup to maybe your setup eats the rear tires specifically, but you change them at the halfway point when you stop? Or maybe you just start heavy, and then swap. Or maybe you start light and then just take a full load of fuel in that 25-second window. That's where the strategy comes into play that doesn't exist in those other long races.
Because of the size of the fields, Randy, I tell you, in those, especially in the 90-minute races, I like to get that hot shoe in the car to start things off. And certainly, if you've got a team that has worked together for a long time, who the fast driver is, who the one that maybe is not quite as fast, and that's my gamble, because being at the front of these fields, and we saw this during the qualifiers, being at the front of these fields is very, very important, especially, and I don't want to keep harping on Zolder, but a track like Zolder, getting off to a good jump, it does not hurt your strategy at all. The driver change, what you can do with the car, you know what, I want to maximize every bit of that time I have to be in the pit with the driver change, so if I got enough time to take a couple tires, I'm going to take them.
Track position has always played off and been huge dividends in this championship. And Jake, I'm going to come back to you on this one because you were here for all of last year. I mean, think about last season. We didn't really have very many cars, very many teams, I think, at any point who did a fantastic drive through the field. And from what I can remember, it only happened on two occasions. It happened at the 6 hours of Spa, and it happened at the 3 hours of Imola. And both times, it was the Heidenfeld Core Motorsports Audi. One time, they just had a poor qualifying. I think Alex got a 1X on what was supposed to be his hot lap. Had to start about 18th or 19th, if I recall correctly. Second time, they had a drive-through. They basically started last plus about 10 seconds, and they still managed to pull off a second-place finish.
Heidenfeld Core Motorsports were undoubtedly the stars of the show in 2016, and you can't take the effort that was put in by Alexander Voss and Niels Koch. Both of them put in some sensational drives over the season, and don't forget, before issues happened at Silverstone, they came in for their pit stop and they were clear as well in the lead there. So you look at Heidenfeld Core, they were incredibly unlucky during that 2016 season, and I think for what they do and for their drives through the field, I think they have been that standout endurance team in 2016. They caught everybody off guard in qualifying, they caught everybody off guard here. Now people know who they are and what they can do, and even with the addition of Kei Kashubi as well, they will be that team to look out for.
Before we go talking about some of these teams in specifics, I want to go down each one of you. I want to ask what you think the race of the championship is going to be, which track you think we're going to see the best show, and why. Joe, I'm going to start with you. Monza, Brands, Silverstone, Zolder, Spa, and the Nürburgring. Which one will put on the best race?
To be honest, I feel like the best race is probably going to be coming from Brands Hatch. Not necessarily from the front of the field, but you're going to see incredible racing in the mid-pack because Brands Hatch is notoriously hard to pass on. So if you get cars out of place at any point in the field, which I can tell you is probably going to happen throughout there, you're going to see great battles where drivers really have to work hard to try and get by slower machines, slower teams. Now, up at the front might be a little bit more of a snoozer there, but as far as the best bang for your buck, watch Brands Hatch.
Brands Hatch definitely wasn't a snoozer last year. And Jake, now coming to you, which one do you think will be the star of the season?
I think it's actually going to be the Nürburgring in the season finale. You're going to have the championship allure, which is not going to be decided by the end of the season, not by any stretch of the imagination. There will be a decider, and that much is going to be paramount. You're going to have that come into play. You're going to see different teams trying different strategies at that 3-hour event. You're also going to see specialists coming actually for the Nürburgring. German teams especially, they're always there, they're always practicing. There's VLN that always plays into the mind. Granted, most of that is going to be the Nordschleife, but you still have elements of that Nürburgring Grand Prix Streck that comes into play. You look at so many different variables at a track which can be incredibly unpredictable at multiple ventures. I think that we could see some very dramatic finishing, like we saw with Coanda's very late charge come 2016.
Sean, which one for you think are you looking forward to? That is your pick for the big show, the big race?
Well, unfortunately, my partner Joe stole my thunder on Brands Hatch. Thanks, Joe. You know what? I know it can be a little boring at times, but man, give me Spa for the 6 hours of Spa. That's not a layup. Spa is not, for those of you here in America or overseas, I'm sorry, layup is a basketball move. It's pretty predictable, pretty easy, but that's not Spa. Going to have a lot to contend with. And, by the time we get to July 22nd, who knows what iRacing may have in store for us between then. We may see some changes that could be detrimental to that race. I'm speculating, okay? I know nothing. Nobody from iRacing talks to me, but I'm speculating a bit. But I think that that race number 5 on the schedule, I think that's the one that you're going to get your bang for your buck out of.
Before we go to the teams, I lied and say we're going to go down some team predictions yet. I actually want to talk about something a little bit different. Let's talk about this car lineup we're going to be seeing if I accidentally go to the wrong graphic. And this is something both...
It was a little bit tough to pinpoint. You and I talked about this a little bit before the show, that there weren't a lot of drivers in the qualifiers that were going for the Ford, much to the dismay of our partner Bill, who really thinks it's the prettiest car out there. And we did see it wielded very well in some hands. You mentioned INX Racing made great use of it. I think, from what I could tell, it's a car, and this may have changed since the qualifiers, since they've updated a bit. You mentioned there were some complaints about it being a little overpowered. It's a car that seems to be relatively well-rounded, but a little bit like the McLaren, that it's not as friendly with the curbs. That if you can get a team that feels comfortable in the car, that it could be a top contender. But that is really what it's more going to be coming down to. Are your drivers okay with how it handles? Because if you try and shoehorn some drivers that really don't feel at ease in that car, they're going to have a hard time getting consistent results. Sean, I'd like to hear your thoughts on it, though.
I do. I'm not to be cliche here already, but I'm going to agree with you there. You definitely want your drivers to be comfortable in the car. Such a big let's face it, this is an endurance series. You spend an awful lot of time in the seat, not just practicing to get to these races, but the actual race itself. Yeah, you've got to be comfortable in what you're driving. And, going back to the Ford, I love the Ford, and I certainly think it showed its strength, when we got to, the bigger, like Spa. Okay, great car at Spa. A little bit tougher in a place like Zolder. We'll see what the BOP is going to do for these machines. Joe, I'm always going to lament for the McLaren.
Me too.
Yeah, we have a soft spot for that machine. But again, with all the changes that iRacing has made lately, the updates, we're going to get to see what kind of balance we have amongst the fields. I'm sure they're all figuring it out right now in test sessions for sure.
As my voice wasn't getting picked up on OBS, so I'll start again. But talking about the balance of performance, the VLN Championship was sort of the best preview that we had in terms of balance of performance. And really, last season, Jake, we didn't really see that Mercedes be strong during that entire year at VLN. This year, though, the Audis and the Mercedes have been fighting relatively hard amongst one another.
Yes, I think that when we've been looking at how VLN has been a prime example, you've been looking at that battle between Audi and Mercedes. Of course, both those cars were incredibly well-rounded last season, and I think there's going to be an element of that again that we are going to be seeing. I think the Mercedes certainly has been proving its point over VLN. It's done a very good job, but the Audi, you can't seem to forget it right now. I think there's still one better sort of marker, shall we say, in all of that, and that comes to Tuesday nights in the form of the Synology GT3 Championship. All 5 cars are there, drivers are all pushing for it. Granted, though, the ability level is, you could argue, more diminished, but what you do see is that there are other cars that still prove that they can still be in the fight. The Ford GT can always be in the fight. There's sometimes the McLaren has been getting itself up in there and has really proved that it can do a job when it is there to be required. So when you look at those cars, I think it's arguably the most even field that we got. And even though the BMW isn't really the car that works well, for some of those top teams at circuits which are very much reliant on that acceleration factor, I think the BMW has a great shot as well.
Well, and this is actually going to be a prelude, because you say that BMW doesn't work well. Let's go down to your team spotlights. And now some of the teams, we don't know the car choices just yet, but this first team, we know their car choices between their 3 machines. We're going to start it out with VRS, Coanda, Sinsport, and down their 3 lineups. Their championship winning car from last year, the number 1 machine, is going to be driven by Marcus Lenderman, Renz Broekman, Klaus Kavakis, and Martin Kroenke. Number 18 machine, if those who are somewhat observant, that's basically the Radicals car from last season, except with Jorn Jens plugged into it. Mac Backham, Jeremy Butchaloop, and Jorn Jens. Then the number 8, Mitchell de Jong, David Williams, Philip Stam, and Rocco Barone. Jake, there's been a bit of shuffling over the course of the offseason at Coanda, and that's really no surprise considering a lot of the new names they've gotten. The interesting thing to note, 18 and the 8 machine are both driving Mercedes. The number 1 of Lenderman and Broekman, Kavakis, and Kroenke, they're going to the BMW. So one of the strongest teams in the championship are dividing their forces on this BOP debate.
They are here, and I'm not surprised that the main car is running a BMW here, mainly because that BMW was being run last season. It was very heavily run by the likes of Klaus Kavakis. It was run by Renz Broekman. You look at those drivers and you look at how confident they feel. What sense does it make for the title-winning car to change once again, to do all that work that they've put a year into and just discard it and try again? I think that it is a good decision here when you look at sort of the teams that they're playing in. The fact that they've got 2 Mercedes teams in terms of the forms of the 8 and also the 18 as well. I think that it comes down to the fact that most of those drivers in that Mercedes are new to the series and maybe a little bit new to the team as well. You talk about Backham and Bootsloop and the fact that they were at Radicals Online last season. The fact that they switched.
Brands Hatch.
Yeah, winners from Brands Hatch as well. So you look at the teams, they are all incredibly strong. They can all prove that they can do a very good job with what they can do. I think the one thing that we need to look at, though, is the fact that the big scare factor for every single driver and every single team is the fact that you have an unbeatable Martin Kroenke in 2017. He's been unbeaten in Neo. He's got 3 straight wins in the iRacing World Championship, reigning champion, 8 wins in 9 races in the iRacing World Championship, and comes off such a rich vein of form that if Martin Kroenke does every single race, I don't see who beats him in qualifying, and I don't see who beats his team in the race.
Well, sorry to rain on your parade somewhat here, Jake. Martin, talking with some of the Coanda guys, I'm friends with a couple of them over there, they said that Martin's actually essentially putting his full focus into the WC GPS and that he's mostly just a reserve driver for this Blancpain championship. Though I'm still hopeful that we see a bit of OP Martin Kroenke come out and drive during the course of this championship. Because that's going to be a race that'll be very interesting to watch. And now I'm going to go over to both Jake and I'm mixing up my J's, to Joe and to Sean here, talking about this number 8 machine car, because Mac, Jeremy, and Jorn, that's sort of just a generally strong lineup. Talking about the number 8 Michaud, Mitchell de Jong, David Williams, Philip Stam, and Rocco Barone, that was the Coanda car that had to re-qualify for this championship. You guys mentioned that they were dominant, but they did it in the Audi. How do you think they're going to do in the Mercedes? And I mean, how hard did they dominate during that qualifying process?
They dominated pretty darn hard. They won a number of the races that we broadcast. Now, I don't have the stats with me on which ones that they won that weren't broadcast, but when they were on air, they almost seemed unstoppable. The fact that they had to requalify, I mean, that's a testament to the fact that maybe they won't be as good once they get into the big boys here. But it could be over the winter that they regathered, they maybe regrouped a little bit and kind of put their heads together and say, okay, where's our weaknesses? How can we seal the cracks in this team and come back swinging? From what I saw with Mitchell de Jong and David Williams, I think they're ready. Mitchell was really the hot shoe of the two, just phenomenal hopping in the car and controlling the pace. And then David Williams, Sean's going to laugh at this, but I compare him to myself, but much faster, obviously, because he's the safe pair of hands. You throw David in the car once you got in there. He's the anchor. He brings it home and just seals the deal.
Yeah, I agree, Joe. David's a closer for sure. Mitchell, awful fast, man. He blew us away last season with his pace, and then the safe hands there, David Williams. But all around, great effort by both of them in the qualifiers. But again, De Jong was the hot shoe in that team, and yeah, had that car on the edge at times, but it did pay off in the end.
Jake, you say in the chat that you disagree. What do you disagree with?
I disagree with David Williams being a safe pair of hands. I think that when it comes down to it, you put him on his own, you give him a task at the front of the field to get him home. Yes, he can do it. You put him, though, in a field where he's fighting with other drivers. Time and time again, as I watched Formula Renault broadcast after Formula Renault broadcast, it was always David Williams who found himself in the wall. It was always Rocco Barone who found himself in the wall. I think that is a little bit of a problem team in the sense that Mitchell de Jong is quick, but the problem that Mitchell de Jong has is he's focusing more in terms of his rallycross career, so he might not be there all the time. It comes down to David Williams, Rocco Barone, and Philip Stam. David Williams, put him against other drivers fighting wheel to wheel. I actually worry about that team's ability to finish races.
It is sort of a big question mark, and the thing you have to think about there, Jake, is that your argument actually holds some pretty decent evidence, because you think about last season in the Blancpain GT Championship, there was 2 Coanda cars. One won the championship, won about half the series. The other, I don't think, ever finished outside of the top 15, or I'll say above the top 15, except for one time. And how many times was that second Coanda car in the wall?
Quite a bit, and we often had to say as one of our mottos, no, that's not the 81 car in the wall, that's the 18 in the wall, or something like that. That was the issue that we kept seeing with that second Coanda car. Maybe there was a little bit of an air of complacency with that second car, but they have to be in a situation where if they come in and they've won that qualifying championship, which they have to live up to reputation. Otherwise, it's doing their entire team an injustice. I think that it is going to be one of those things where you look at that second car and even that third car as well. All three of those teams have to go above and beyond what they did last season because everyone else is doing exactly the same thing.
So let's talk about, before we move on from Coanda, Joe, I'm going to ask you this question and you only. Which of these three cars will be the car to watch and the car to be out for? Will it be the 18 Mercedes of Mac, Jeremy, and Jorn? Will it be the 8 of Mitchell, David, Philip, and Rocco? Or will it be that lone BMW of Marcus, Renz, Klaus, and Martin?
This is going to be a hard choice because there's great names on each of the teams. Knowing, that's a great point about Mitchell not being in there a lot because of his real-world racing obligations. That kind of makes a big knock against them because he is really, really strong. Looking at them, I honestly have to go with the number one. Martin Kroenke on there, just such a fast pair of hands. Really knows how to manhandle these cars. Number one gets my pick.
So we're going to move on now to the second team. This team finished second in the championship last season. This is Team Heidenfeld Core Motorsports, and they're going to field 2 cars this season. Number 33, second place finishers in the championship, carries over. That team lineup is Alexander Voss, Niles Koch, and Kei Kashube, and they have the 66 of Andre Bocher, Angelo Mickel, and Mortis Lohner. Jake, we watched the VLN championship last year, and in all year we were saying we cannot wait until Kei gets his Blancpain chance. We can't wait until Kei gets the spot in that Heidenfeld car. Well, he's got his spot. I think he's going to prove to us that he deserved it on Saturday.
I disagree.
Really?
I do. I think that Kei Kashube is overrated as a driver. When I've seen Kei Kashube race, I haven't seen him up there. I haven't seen him in a position where he's ready to win. I think that the team is fantastic and Kei Kashube will have his moments, but the question of is he out and out the best driver in that team? I don't think so. I think Alexander Voss is the leader of that first Heidenfeld car, and I think that there's a reason why Alexander Voss goes on my Mount Rushmore of the 4 greatest sim racers at the moment right now. I like the second car as well. I think Andre Bocher is a fantastic driver switching over to Blancpain. I think Angelo Mickel and Moritz Lohner have a lot to work with him and have a lot of potential. But I think that Kei Kashube is a little bit overrated in that first team, and he will need to prove himself in the first 2 rounds to prove me wrong.
Interesting. Now, we do have the other team of the number 66. That's Andre Bocher, Angelo Mickel, and Mortis Lohner. Angelo Mickel, winner of your 2016 Sim Racing Expo from Nürburgring, and going back to Joe and Sean on this one, those guys ran very well through that qualifying championship as well, coming out with a strong result, getting themselves a second car in. Only had a single car team last season in the big championship.
Yeah, they looked very strong throughout the qualifiers. One thing that really impressed me was Lohner's battle at Monza, where he took a 4th place. He had to fight his way forward through that one. And then Bocher had a nice, solid, somewhat quiet drive to a top 5 at Zolder as well. And boy, getting a top 5 at Zolder, you got to be really good in that car. We keep mentioning how chaotic that one is and how much that can trip people up. So you got to give that number 66 car credit for being able to manage that at such a difficult circuit. So I kind of wonder, since they weren't really fighting for wins in those, though, I think it's going to be a lot harder swimming upstream in the races this season than they were in the qualifiers for the number 66. So I don't know if they really have the chutzpah to try and get themselves up fighting for wins or top 10s in there, but we'll have to wait and see how they fare once they get with the big boys.
Sean, I'm going to come to you for my question on Heidenfeld Core Motorsports here. 33 and the 66. I think it's fairly easy to say that the 33 will likely be the quicker of the 2. But of the drivers, of Alex Voss, Niles Koch, Kei Kashube, Andre Bocher, Angelo Mickel, and Mortis Lohner, which of those 6 drivers do you think will be the big driver, the driver that a team really depends on through that championship? Who do you think will be the all-star of those 6?
Wow, that's a good question. I really like Lohner. I really do. Now, is he the star of the team? Maybe not, but I'll tell you what, he's got strong potential there to be the star of the 66 team. Yeah, I'm going to stick with Launer. I think we're going to be really surprised by what the 66 team does this season.
I definitely think they'll be competitive, and during the offseason, actually, through talking with a couple people, most notably Marcus Lenderman, there's a lot of teams that are going to be very, very competitive. And that's the thing. You have 3 Coanda cars, all of which could potentially fight for the championship. You have 2 Heidenfeld Core Motorsport cars that could both fight for the championship. And you bring yourselves to team number 3 of INX Racing, 3 teams that could all fight for the championship. So we're only at 3 organizations. You already have potentially 8 cars that could fight for the championship here. So as we're looking through the 3 cars that we have here, and Jake, this is going to be an interesting one for us to talk about. Number 10 machine, you have Yoni Tormala, Jack Sedgwick, Jake Sturgis, and Nathan Schartner. Number 11 of PJ Sturgis, William Levesque, and Philip Diaz. I think for the most part that team is unchanged from last season. And then the 12 of Friskops, Aloma, Grunner, and Cattell. Couple new names coming in, most notably, Jake, that 10 machine of Tormala, Sedgwick, Sturgis, and Schartner. Couple new names being put into that car because of what we saw with Isaac Price happen last season. They actually had to go and re-qualify due to the fact that they had to bring 2 new drivers in. Overall, I think all 3 of these teams are very well-rounded in terms of talent.
I think they are, but by the same volition, I think the INX have struggled so far this season in terms of getting back up to grips and getting towards the top, and I think it really will affect them in terms of Blancpain this season. I think that of all the teams that will challenge, maybe INX Racing Red only will really get that challenge in, mainly because of Joni Tamala, and I'm not ashamed to say that INX Racing is a one-man team at times. But we have seen how INX Racing Red imploded from the championship lead with just 2 rounds to go. Jack Sedgwick didn't get the job done. They will need to rely on people like Jake Sturgis and Nathan Schartner, but how much of their potential is good enough to be in that top INX Racing Red team? Stuff will need to be said about that. INX Racing Yellow, I think, will be consistent again and will surprise again. Maybe they're going to be inside the top 10, potentially some top 5s in them. But the one thing that I am shocked about is the fact that Alexia Loma is not in that INX Racing Red car when he was clearly the star over the winter for INX.
It's definitely a big question, and that number 12 machine of Friskops, Aloma, Grunner, and Cattell, I would definitely agree, is probably the big question mark. That 3rd INX car last season really didn't perform all that well, but that said, during the offseason going to you, Sean, that INX Red car of Tormala, Sedgwick, Sturgis, and Schartner, they were, and this is actually one of the other big points, that INX lineup were one of the teams that were driving Fords, whereas everyone else was in BMWs or Mercedes or Audis during the qualification process. Those INX guys were very, very competitive, being one of the only groups driving that blue oval.
Yeah, and my hat's off to the drivers. You've got to drive that machine. You've got to finesse the Ford, and I think it had every bit to do with the talent behind the wheel in the qualifiers. And look for more out of them this season. But again, it all comes back to the balance of power on these machines, and I don't know if that Ford GT is going to make enough of improvement to be a factor.
Now it's time for Jake's opportunity to get asked a question. And Jake, I'm going to ask it to you on this one. Of these 3 INX cars, which one will disappoint the most?
I'm going to say INX Racing Blue. Mainly because I look at INX Racing Red, it will do its job, but maybe it will be around the top 5, and I think that's where you have to realistically expect them on the performance and what it looks like on paper. I think INX Racing Yellow is a very consistent team, and they have some very, very good drivers. PJ Sturgis maybe is going to be a little bit short for time trying to do every single series. William Levesque is a driver who can go in and do a job. And Philip Diaz, you have to remember, I believe it was the iRacing All-Star race. He took the overall victory in that, and you can't take away credit for racing against some of the greatest drivers that iRacing has ever seen. The problem that INX Racing Blue has is the fact that it doesn't scream out apart from Alexia Loma. Alexia Loma is a fantastic driver when he gets into that groove, but we saw with his drives last season when it came to Glacier Racing, it wasn't spectacular. Robin Friskops, we know, is a midfield-ish driver, so INX Racing Blue will need to rely on Friskops to get themselves through the field. Justin Brunner is a little bit on the slower side, and I know that he'll have USF 2000 that he'll be trying to be running through the year. That might take away from him in his opportunities. And Simon Cattell has got a World Championship license for the Formula One. That's great for him, but he doesn't have that overall pace, the likes of Friskops, the likes of Aloma. So it's a very shaky team, shall we say, and it will take one puff of wind to blow that team down.
So moving on now, so that's 3 teams and 8 potential cars that could contend for the championship. Some definitely stronger than others. Now we're going to add in 3 more with Team Redline, and this is another big one to talk about. You have the 36 of Gregor Hutu, Tommy Haka, Enzo Benito, and Ali Pakala. The 34 of Bono Hui, Dom Doohan, Freak Shohorst, and Christian Shimjak. And the 38 of Alexei Yusi Yokola, Kelvin Vanderlyn, and Lando Norris. Jake, I'm going to come to you. Redline as a whole last season, they had a couple races where they looked strong. Most notably, the Redline blue car at Spa was phenomenal. Overall, though, they were just sort of maybe top 5 at best, never really putting a fight in for a win. Really, I think their best opportunities were at Monza, where they fell short, and, like I said, at Spa.
I don't think that any Redline car will get a top 5 in the championship this season. And the reason behind that is you look at the teams, even though that Redline black car is the strongest on paper, even though they have added Olli Pakala to that list with Hutu and Haka, I think they don't do enough. I think that the reason why Redline is here is for exposure, and I don't think it's necessarily about winning the championship for them. Granted, they're going to be high up the field. Granted, they're going to be doing amazing. I still don't think, though, that they have the mentality to win this series, and I don't think they have the effort put in to win this series. I know there is a lot said about them when it comes to them, that they like this sort of environment where the pressure's off them a little bit. They're not an endurance team. They're not expected to go win races. They can race and have some fun with the car without necessarily having to put all the pressure and the performance behind it to really back it up. I think that the Redline blue car isn't going to do well at all, even though you've got likes of Lando Norris in the Formula 3 and Kelvin Vanderlyn. I think that Redline green will show a little bit of promise with House and Freek Shothorst. But that Redline black car, I think, unless they do something amazing this season and they really concentrate on it, I do not see it getting a top 5 this season.
They're really going to need Enzo to turn up, and I think that's one of the big things that fell short from that Redline black car. Enzo Benito didn't turn up until the final round of the championship at the Nürburgring. And you think about Enzo Benito, Joe, has been one of the most dominant GT drivers in the sim for a very long time. Problem is that about 1.5 years, 2 years ago, he seemed to have just lost a desire to really drive and has basically went from racing all the time to turning up just sort of haphazardly. That team could be competitive, I think, if he might turn up and if he gets that drive again. Question is Enzo going to?
And, you know, that's one of the big differences between sim racing and real world racing. Real world racing, you have a lot of money obligations and various things to make sure you show up. In sim racing, even though a lot of times there is real money on the line, these guys are juggling it with real world obligations, such as jobs, families, various other things, sometimes real world racing as well, fighting them for sim racing, that you can't tell always when someone's going to show up. There's stuff that they have to give precedence over this as much as they'd like to devote themselves to. And hopefully someday I'd love to see this become an esport that really you can devote yourself to, and you can make sure that you've got a team that'll show up week in and week out. But it's disappointing to see Enzo do this. But on the other hand, it's understandable because just like everybody else, a lot of these people watching this can understand he's got other things that maybe are pulling him away.
Sean, I'm coming to you for this one. Of these 3 Redline cars, which will run the best?
It's probably going to be the 36. I with Hudu at the top of that, and with the addition of Ollie, I just think that's going to be, you know, that's certainly for Team Redline. That's going to be the number 1 car for them.
Now moving in, we have 2 more teams here in a little spotlight, just going over a lot of the teams that remain competitive. And let's see, what is that? That's currently 11 potentially very competitive cars. Let's add 2 more. One definitely a contender for a championship. The number 24 of Santeri Kalunki, OP Frederick Rasmussen, Claudio Klima, and Isaac Price. And the 23 of Thomas Lorenz, Jan Kiru, Maxime Pauli, and Yuri Pekonen. Jake, that number 24 machine with Isaac Price in it. We've been talking about Isaac getting into one of those, into that core car since the exchange happened last year. That number 24 car now, especially that Frederick has a little bit more support and someone who basically can match him on pace, if not potentially outdo him, that team had just become not only a championship contender, but potentially a championship favorite.
This team excites me. I love the pairings that this team has come up with, and Corim Racing, I think, are the future of sim racing right now. I think they do a very good job. I like the signings they've made as well. If they want to, even for next season, they've got Paschalis Jurgis and Sebastian Job that they can throw into this. That is sensational for everything that they want to do in a core sim racing team. And I think that that 24 car is a title contending team. Isaac Price, we know, has been revolutionary for core sim racing. It's brought the tipping point for the avalanche of talent that is coming towards core. You look at Frederick Rasmussen, who is arguably the poster boy right now for Blancpain Sprint Series, for Blancpain Racing. And if Frederick Rasmussen really gets behind it and really gets a run going, I think there's at least 2-3 wins that core sim racing car can do. I think there's a championship that's worth it. I still like the BES core sim racing car as well. Thomas Lorenz, Yannick Kiru, Maxime Pauli, and Jerry Parkinen. They're good. I think they'll be a great midfield team. The question is, do they have the overall talent to get themselves to the next level? Arguably, I don't think so.
Yeah, I definitely agree that 23 team, I mean, overall they're strong. But that 24 team is really the team you have to, try to watch out for. And that's something we've really been hyping up both during the offseason and even coming into this, is that overall the entirety of this field has just gotten so much stronger. And you think about that core group was running for top 10s, top 5, even when it was just Frederick and Santeri or Frederick and Claudio running in those two teams. Santeri and Claudio are both very, very quick. However, Frederick is much quicker than either of them, and they were still pulling off top 5s.
Yeah, they were. And I think that what Isaac Price also brings into that team is a level of setup knowledge that he brought away from INX. I think that Isaac Price, as a mechanic, as a brain, as someone who can figure out a setup and really make it work, I think he is invaluable to core sim racing right now and will be paramount to their success. Not always on the track, but when it comes to behind the scenes and what he does for many teams, I think Isaac Price is going to be that tipping point between core sim racing challenging from top 5s to victories, even if he's not there, because he can make a car work, and he will make a car work for the likes of Rasmussen and Kalunki. The other point that you have to make sure that is something that works, Isaac Price was there for the first half of the season with INX Racing Red. INX Racing Red at Monza were there side by side going into the final lap, contact with Heidenfeld Core. You look at what they did at what was the second round of the championship, they did something really well. They took the victory at Silverstone. I think that Isaac Price knows what he can do with a setup, and actually, as a tactical mind, when it comes into strategy play, I think he can also be a really, really great driver.
Joe and Sean, I guess I'll throw it to you first. That number 23 team of Arenz, Kiru, Pauli, and Pakkanen, that's the team that had to get themselves qualified back in through the Blancpain qualifiers in the winter. How did that team seem to you in terms of pace? Were they running up near the front for wins? Were they running mid-pack and just getting consistent points all season long? How did that second team really jump out at you?
Well, they're a bit of a placeholder. I mean, if I'm being honest, I think Arenz and Kuro have the pace to maybe hold down that middle part of the field, but I don't see much beyond that. I mean, Pakkanen is certainly an interesting one to watch, and Paulie, I mean, it's a good team, but again, maybe a little bit of a placeholder there in the qualifiers.
Joe, how did they seem for you guys?
From what I watched on Kiru, unfortunately, the one that I missed was Zolder, where he really got some light shown on him. Jan did pretty good there. I was able to go back and watch the broadcast, but I didn't get to watch how he drove live and see some of the things maybe that the camera didn't catch. But he seemed like a strong driver. I disagree a little bit with Sean that they're a placeholder team. I think they will be pretty decent, but nothing really that I think will be able to be outstanding in the broadcast. But again, I always say this because the BOP I think is going to change things up a lot, and also just being around different drivers is going to change things a lot. We really do not know until we get to the actual season.
Jake, I'm going to come to you for this one. Frederick or Isaac? Who's going to be quicker? Consistently. Frederick?
I think Frederick will be consistently quicker, but I think that it's not going to be by much. Isaac Price is incredibly quick, but he brings more to the table in a backseat role, you could argue, more than he does being the absolute quickest driver in the team. We saw what he could do getting the best out of Joni Tamala. I think he can do exactly the same getting the best out of Frederick Rasmussen.
Now, going on to our final team, as we're going to go now to Pure Racing Team, another team with some changes and some interesting pickups over the offseason. You have the number 71 machine, Jonas Wallmeyer, Andres Almensberger, and Maximilian Wenig. You have the number 70 with Max Benecke, Ivo Howler, and Patrick Pichler. And the 72 with Florian Voigt, Dennis Grabowski, and Peter Koch. There's a lot of talent up and down this field, Joe.
There really is, and I've been watching a lot of these drivers for a number of years now, before the BES even, because they drove in an endurance series that we covered on the GSRC, and all of these guys are so phenomenally strong, and they're not afraid to fight door to door. That's what always impresses me, is even though they can manage to pull away and kind of run their own race, if they do find themselves in the thick of it, I would really want any of these guys, Pichler, Venig, Almensberger, Benecke, are just, from my experience at least, seeing are incredible, have incredible racecraft. So I think these are going to be very strong teams. I think they are going to be up for the championship, and I'm excited to see how the racing plays out with them.
So, because 4 a.m. Randy is apparently just not very smart, there's also a fourth Pure Racing team that I missed. That is the number 73 machine of Mert Ozil, Mark Elkeman, Daniel Skoik, and Lauren Heinrich. I just like to say, and both the GSRC guys as well as Jake can ascertain to this. This was thrown together relatively last minute. I mean, Sean, I think your briefing from not knowing you were doing this to being on air was about 5 minutes, 10 maybe?
I was watching the top of the ninth of the Yankee game, yes, and I got pulled into this, and happy to be here, man. I'm having a blast, man, and I'm not going to let you guys get done without me talking about a team to watch out for this season, so take that for what it's worth.
Yeah, so sorry to that number 73, guys. That was not intentional, but me at 4 o'clock in the morning wanting to get to bed, as well as, okay, I control left, and I just, apparently at around 3:34 is when I can't count past 3. So, sorry to you guys. But, Jake, this entire Pure group, I mean, even that team I forgot with Ozil, Elkeman, Skoik, and Heinrich, a lot of talent there. The 71 machine, you have Andres Almensberger, Jonas Wallmeyer, Maximilian Wenig. They're always quick. Max, Ivo, and Patrick, I think, are potentially sort of the top team here, with Florian, Dennis, and Peter even having a lot of potential as well. All of these three teams, I think, could be potential contenders if they can finish races.
This is scary from Pure. The lineups that they've put out here are absolutely godly, I'm going to say. If you could choose any of the... let's try and count 13 drivers that they've put out here, I'd probably choose every single one of them. I'd like to choose every single one of them. This is a very, very scary Pure Racing team, and especially that 70 car is going to be that car that strikes fear into the hearts of everyone. Maximilian Benecke, Ivo Howler, and Patrick Pichler. All three of them have the potential to be world-class race winners in anything their hearts desire at any given moment. And the fact that you got Maximilian Benecke, who at the moment, when you look at VLN, has been not making any mistakes at all in terms of what he's done. Maybe one that he had on the tap in the opening race of the season. I think Pure Racing Team Red have to be considered favourites for the title this season. You look at Pure Racing Team Blue, that will be up there. They've taken Benecke out of that car, but they've still got Walmart, they've still got Almensberg, and they've still got Venig. That car will still be there. You look at Pure Racing Team Black, Florian Voigt is an incredibly quick driver. Dennis Grabowski, you saw what he did at Imola. You saw what he did as part of that Curb Surfers team. He is incredible as a driver and can certainly do well. Peter Koch came into the team last season at Nürburgring 24 Hour. It's been 1 year since then, and I think he will do a great job. Pure Racing Team Yellow is the only team that I have a little bit of a worry with. I've talked with Lauren Heinrich personally. He's struggling a little bit with that GT3 car and also struggling a little bit in terms of he's getting that ride in ADAC as well in Formula 4. Elkerman isn't the greatest driver. Merzel they'll have to rely on. Schueck I haven't seen personally, but I think that he has something to go there. But Pure Racing Team as a whole is absolutely frightening.
So Jake roasted basically every other team at some point, and Pure Racing Team, you're not getting off the hook just yet because it's my turn to dish out some fire. I think the weak point for this, and Jake, I'm going to come to you at this point as well. I think maturity for this team is going to be a big thing to potentially talk about. I don't think that what happens on the track is going to be what decides what happened with this Pure Racing Team. I think it's going to be what happens off the track and how they conduct themselves. Because as I look up and down this field, you have Max Benecke, who, granted, you could argue this is on the fact, got himself a suspension for the Spa race after an incident he got into in VLN. Ivo Howler, after the first race of the Blancpain Championship at Monza, got himself banned for essentially intentionally losing iRating. And Dennis Grabowski, after Imola, got slapped in the wrist after doing a count sharing with curb surfers. Of these 13 drivers, 3 of them have been essentially parked from the championship at one point or another. I think that's a big thing that team has to try to figure out. There's a lot more to being competitive than just being quick. I don't know if this team has it just yet.
There's Grabowski in the situation that he had no choice. He was locked out of his account. He had to switch in to give curb surfers a chance. In that situation, I don't blame him for taking the penalty that he got. For Ivo Howler, Patrick Pichler, it's arguable that it didn't need to happen for what they need to do. And for Maximilian Benecke, the suspension that he had, I think he's a driver who has bounced back from that and can do very well. I think that when you looked at them in terms of them becoming a big-time team, you look at the drivers that were there, maybe they didn't handle themselves the best way possible, but because they've had that year, because they've been able to develop, they've understood what is expected of them as arguably the greatest institution of endurance racing at the moment. I think that expectations will weigh heavy on them, but I think it will bring them back into life. I know quite a few people from the Pure Racing team, and I think they have the hunger and the desire, and I actually think they have the professionalism now this season to really go improve themselves and really show what they can mean in what was a series last season, which they really ran away and were shy from.
Now, Joe, I think this is the last one of our team spotlights. I think of the second half, you're the only one I've not gone to here. Of these 4 teams, not 3, which one do you think will? Actually, let's do this. Which one do you think will be the worst of the 4? Which will be the best of the 4?
Oh gosh, worst of the 4. Gosh, I'm going to give myself the harder one first because, like I said, every one of them is so solid. I'm probably going to go with the 4th team that you don't have listed here, just because looking at these names in front of me, yeah. Looking at these names, it's hard to find any weaknesses in here. I know you mentioned some for the number 70 team, but even still, everything I've seen of them just are so incredibly solid. As far as the strongest team, honestly, oh gosh, it's so hard between the 71 and the 70 team. I'm going to have to go with the 70 because of what I've seen them during the qualifiers and just how strongly they've run. I feel like Benecke, Haveler, and Pichler are going to be just the strongest force out of what is already an incredibly strong team, as Jake was pointing out. So PRT, definitely going to be ones to looking out for, but the number 70 are likely going to be up at the front.
So, of the teams we put on our little team spotlight here, Coanda, Heidenfeld, INX, Redline, Core, and Pure, just a handful of teams, and already you're talking about 15, 16 cars that should be running near the front of this championship. And we had about an hour on, and this has been an hour we've been on the air, so now it's time to get to closing thoughts. Jake, I'm going to start with you here. I said that of these 16 cars, every one of them could be running up front. How could you be running up near the front if you're running 16th?
How can you be running up front when you're running 16th? Well, it's going to differ between race to race because you're going to see qualifying become integral to this series. It's going to be about 1 lap pace overall, you could say, more than the racing itself, because the difference between these 16 teams is not much. And you can talk about other teams as well. You can talk about Vortex, you can talk about Gale Force, you can talk about Apex, Glacier, Evolution Race Australia, GT Ross, whoever it is. You can
50
talk about
teams you can talk about.
Yeah, you can talk about every single team being within a second, and that's 50 cars within a second, which is unheard of anywhere except here. I think there are going to be some fantastic teams that are going to be towards the front. I think anywhere upwards of about 20-25 teams could take pole position every single race. So when it comes down to it, track position is going to be key. Consistently getting yourself up there in qualifying is going to be key. Strategy is going to be key. And actually, staying out of trouble is the other big factor here. Because you can stay out of trouble as much as you can, but every time you go for a move, every time that you have a car side by side with you, you're rolling a dice. You're rolling a dice on whether you survive that corner, survive that straight, survive that pit entry, or not. And it comes down to drivers who don't make mistakes when it comes to speeding on pit lane. Doesn't come down to mistakes when getting a slowdown penalty. Doesn't come down to making mistakes, having that one bit of contact, having a penalty for the next event. It comes down to who stays cleanest, who keeps themselves on the track, and who has the overall best place in qualifying to give themselves track position for the race. It's arguably way too close to call in this. I think there's going to be 4 or 5 cars that can challenge for the title, though.
Joe, last season, well, I say last season, during the qualifying season actually format-wise, very similar to what we have on schedule for the big championship, couple 90-minute races, some 3 hours races. Only thing that we really didn't have in that qualifier was the 4-hour, well, we didn't have a 6-hour race at Spa. We had a 4-hour race at Spa. From that championship, looking forward now to the big one, what are you looking forward to? What do you think will be the things people need to watch out for? Both, if it could be tracks, it could be teams, it could be drivers, it could be strategy. What do you think is going to be the big talking point over the championship as a whole?
Strategy is definitely going to be a big talking point. As Jake mentioned, with track position being so important, and also with times being so close between the drivers, what it's probably going to come down to is not just mistakes on the track, but mistakes if they've got a crew chief up on the box, which Sean can attest to is so important, that those little mistakes, if you don't have everything down solid, if you don't have a plan going into these things, or if you aren't flexible when you need to be, it's going to fall apart. So strategy is going to be a huge talking point. Mainly the big thing I think to watch for is, because the field is so close, is there's going to be a lot of side-by-side racing. It's going to be so hard to pull away, and pressure is going to be immense. If you take the best of the best in GT racing on iRacing, like you said, 50 teams, tons and tons of drivers out there, dozens of drivers that have proven themselves to be the top echelon. That means that everybody is going to be right on top of each other, and the slightest little bobble that you have could open the door that could make the difference down the line in the championship. So the on-track action, the door-to-door racing, definitely going to be one to watch, and the strategy. Those are the 2 big things to me to pay attention to throughout the season.
Sean, for you, for the final point, let's get a little bit more in depth. Monza is the first race coming this Saturday in just a couple days' time. What do you think is the big talking point we're going to see from Monza? Monza, of course, very high speed. Always talk about the draft there. Always talking about fuel economy. What do you think it's going to be that makes teams differentiate themselves from that first big race of the year?
Turn 1, start of the race. I mean, let's face it, that's going to be madness heading down to turn 1 at Mazda from a standing start. And you know what? I mean, if you gave me a choice of tracks that I'd want to start with, actually, Monza, not a bad choice. I think that's a great way to kick it off. The problem is
turn 1 out of the way.
Get turn 1 out of the way, yeah, right off the start. You know what? Again, going back to what Joe said about strategy, I think getting kicked off there at Monza, starting off with a 3-hour race, you do get to try and play it a little bit straightforward, but now you may open yourself up to trying a little bit of risk. What I hope most of these teams have, if not all of them, is a strategist or a defined strategy that allows for a little bit of flexibility, like Joe talked about, because you do have to be flexible. Sometimes the race will dictate a change, some flexibility needed, and you just have to work with it. But it's a lot easier when you've got somebody managing that for you, and you can focus on the drive. And I'm pretty sure most of the major teams we've talked about all have that. But I said I wasn't going to let this go before we get off, and I know we're probably running short on time. But listen, watch out for iRacing Brazil. I championed them a little bit in the qualifiers. Bruno De Carmo and Nato Nascimento, I honestly think that is a team that has great potential to finish in the top 5. They were consistent and fast. They finished third at at Brands Hatch and Silverstone. They recovered well at Zolder. I just think that is a strong team. I think Nascimento is one incredible driver, and I think that the number 75 is going to be one to watch.
Definitely agree with that. For everyone who has a team that we didn't go down individually, we definitely do apologize, but we are somewhat on a relatively strict time crunch here. We didn't really have the time to go down the entire 50-car field for this Blancpain GT Championship. Before we actually go, I'll do the promoing on the RaceSpot side when I close it out. Joe, Sean, what is GSRC? What do you guys have coming up? Where can you find you? What can we watch? When is it happening?
Well, actually, next race that we have is coming up tonight on the GSRC. A bit of a light week for us this week for once, so we're glad to have a little bit of a break. But we've got the Dallara DW12 at Kentucky with the Lionheart Racing Series. And then the next one that we've got coming up after that is the Premier Racing League. Their Cup Series comes back tomorrow night, April 13th, at Kansas Speedway. So a little bit of oval racing. Then we'll get back into it with the road stuff at the Formula Renault with the Apex Online Racing Series on Friday, middle of the day. So Europeans will have a little bit easier time to watching that one kicking off at 3:25 p.m. Eastern time. I guess 7:25 GMT would be easier for them, but April 14th for those. So that's the next 3 that we got going up, and we're pretty excited for this upcoming season here because we got a very, very full schedule. Sean can attest that we're busy, man.
Yeah, we have a busy schedule as well, but parts of the schedule, and well, now we can clock this off. So thank you to everyone for tuning in and listening to the Blancpain GT Series preview show here on RaceSpotTV. Thanks to the guys from GSRC hopping in and joining us. Put on some fantastic work during that qualifying season. Fantastic racing that happened during that season. On the RaceSpot side of things, tonight, 2 races you have to look out for. Skip Barber Series kicks off again. Be sure to watch that exciting championship that runs its way through. As well as this evening, we have the Raven Graphics Contender Series All-Star Race live from Charlotte. And of course, this Saturday, round number 1 of your Blancpain GT World Championship Series. I've been Randy Chineth, joined by Jake Sperry, Joe Peak, as well as Sean Ambrose. Everyone else, be sure to have a good evening. Tune into some of the other shows we have going. We'll see you then. Bye-bye.